talk to you. Welcome, everybody, and thank you so much for joining us tonight. My name is Kate Frankfurt. I'm the Chief Philanthropy Officer of the Tahoe Truckee Community Foundation. And thank you for joining our Forest Futures Salon 2021 fire season, What Just Happened and What Happens Next. So many of us were affected by this fire season. It was the worst on record, with 2.5 million acres burned across California, and a fire season that began 2 months earlier than usual, brought on by drought conditions. 3 of our state's largest wildfires occurred in 2021, with the Dixie and Caldor fires forcing evacuations in our neighboring counties. And whether you were here in the poor air quality or like me, packing and repacking your go bag every weekend, or unable to spend time in this place that you love, it was a summer I'm sure that none of us are ever going to forget. And before we get to Chief Estes and Eli Ilano, and what I know will be an amazing conversation, I want to let you know very quickly a little bit about the Tahoe Truckee Community Foundation. TTCF has been around for more than 23 years. We're over one of 800 community foundations in the United States. We are a grant maker, a collaborator, a convener. We connect people and opportunities, generating resources to build a more caring, creative, and effective community. Welcome to our board chair, Hannah Sullivan, who is, I think, with us this evening. Thank you for joining, Hannah. In addition to making our local nonprofits and providing scholarships, in addition to grant making to our local nonprofits and providing scholarships to local students, we focus on specific attention to initiatives such as family strengthening through the Community Collaborative of Tahoe Truckee, our local housing crisis through the Mountain Housing Council, and forest health through Forest Futures. Climate-focused grant making is something we've been involved with for more than 10 years through our Nature Fund, and we're proud to have distributed more than $1 million to support local projects. For the past 4 years, TTCF has convened experts to help deepen our understanding of wildfire, and we're proud to announce the launch of our Forest Futures initiative. This is a bold, entrepreneurial, and holistic impact strategy, which identifies, builds, accelerates, and scales the solutions we need to help protect our community from catastrophic wildfire. Our Forest Futures salons, like this one, have been integral in shaping that strategy, and we're excited to launch Wildfire 101 series as we work to build community engagement on this important issue. So we're very glad to see so many of you with us tonight. With that, I want to introduce our moderator for the evening, Teal Brown Zimring, Senior Advisor to Forest Futures, who has been integral in the development of our strategy and of our salons. And I'm very excited as well to announce the arrival of our newest TTCF team member, Nicole Lutkemuller, who is now Program Director for Forest Futures and who will moderate tonight's question and answer session. So welcome, Nicole, and welcome, Teal. We're so grateful for the partnership and expertise of this amazing team. And without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Teal.
Thank you, Kate. Welcome, everyone. Thrilled to see so many faces that I know, and perhaps even more so many that I don't. It's a pleasure to meet you, and I am really looking forward to tonight's conversation. So, tiny bit of housekeeping before we jump into a conversation. I hope that you will have questions. I imagine you will have questions, and we encourage them. Please drop them into the chat as they arise for you. We will track them. And if you don't want to send them to everybody, you can send them to Nicole or myself directly. And when we come to that point in the conversation, we'll call on you, unmute yourself, turn your video on if you're able, and ask you to ask your question yourself so that we can hear some other voices this evening. And with that, let me introduce the 2 gentlemen who you have come to hear this evening. Both of whom I am just absolutely honored and thrilled to have a conversation with tonight. Both of them need little introduction, I imagine, to most of this community, but I'm going to give you just a little snapshot into some of their careers, just to give you a sense of who we have with us today. And Supervisor Eli Ilano, we'll start with you. My friend Eli, also one of my teachers as I've become deeper and deeper in the space. So thank you for being here. Eli oversees the U.S. Forest Service's presence on an expanse of over 870,000 acres, 871,495, to be specific, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, carpeting the Sierra in all or part of 6 counties. His career has taken him through the Bureau of Land Management, the Lake Tahoe Basin Unit, includes time working with and for the U.S. Senate, environmental NGOs, and a variety of natural resource management efforts, and is someone that I believe is a great leader in this community, and perhaps most importantly, a member of the Tahoe Truckee community. And so, really it's with that I think we want to introduce both of you. Chief Brian Estes began his career with CAL FIRE in 1991 in the San Diego unit, assigned to engine stations on the Border Division. His career has taken him through a remarkable range of fire station hand crew and staff assignments across the state, from Amador, El Dorado to Tuolumne County, Pine Grove Camp, and the South Division operations. And in 2013, he became the unit's Deputy Chief of Operations, where he served until his appointment as the Fire Chief for the Nevada Yuba Placer unit. I had to practice saying that. We'll see how you've done over the years, Chief Estes. And the Placer County Fire Department in 2017. Chief Estes oversees an operation spanning 3 counties, 411 career employees, and over $11 billion in assessed values at risk. And perhaps most importantly, again, he is a leader in this community and a member of our Tahoe Truckee community. And it's really with that piece of yourselves that we come to tonight's conversation. So thank you both for being here. And to kick us off in what will really be a bit of a back and forth conversation tonight, we have no presentations. Let's start with your role in what just happened. And before actually asking you anything about what really happened, we went through this together. And I think the most critical question is grounded in thank you. Thank you for what you did. Thank you for bringing us to this moment where we started to see the first snow, the first rain. Thank you for everything that has led us to today's conversation. And I realize this is a challenging question to answer, but perhaps it'll give us insight into each of you and your experiences. In some ways, I just want to say, how are you? How are you? And what was this last several months for you? So with that, let's go first to Ellie, because he's the first person on my screen.
Well, thanks, Teal. Thanks, Brian, for extending an invitation to me and being my partner here. And to all of you, it's great to see. I saw, as some people popped up on my screen, some of my neighbors. That's great to see. You're probably tired of hearing me talk about forests and fire, but thanks for indulging us a little bit more. I think to answer your question, Teal, first of all, I'm really happy to see snow and rain. What was it called? The atmospheric river we had was a little bit much right on the heels of what we had experienced, but happy nonetheless. Really loving what we're seeing so far in November. It's really helping us accomplish some important work in the forest actually right now. This is a great time of year for us to do prescribed fire. And these conditions are just outstanding for that. So I'm feeling pretty good about that aspect of things. I wanted to just say that, some of our colleagues around the state are probably not feeling as good as I am because of what they are looking at in the communities that they live in and that they work in. Which is a very different landscape than what we have here in the Tahoe Truckee area at the moment. And so as we talk about what we're kind of feeling and experiencing and looking at here, I think it's also important for us to keep in mind that there are folks across the state who are in definitely a disaster relief mode. They are displaced from their homes. They have experienced loss and of many types, sometimes not just of their homes, but of their communities, of the landscapes that they find sacred and that they cherish. And so I guess I want to kind of temper some of my comments with, I'm always keeping that in the back of my mind. And and I think at least at this point, I'll probably leave it at that and bounce it over to Brian, and we can talk more specifically about maybe moving forward what our roles were or what we saw this last fire season, but just in terms of kind of where I am personally and where some of our folks are personally, we're feeling pretty good on the Tahoe, but we are also cognizant of of our colleagues around the state as well.
Okay, well, I think I'll thank you, Ellie. That was well said, and I'll see if I can tee off from there. And Teal, thank you very much for the invitation again. Thank you, Ellie, for the partnership we have across agency lines, and thank you for everyone who's joining us tonight. It is, one thing I'll say, Teal, about you and your partners and all the other organizations that organize the communities in the kind of the Tahoe Truckee region. It's really admirable to see the organization and also just the community engagement in the conversations surrounding the threat from emerging wildfires and the impacts to our communities here across the counties. And I'll use that word impact to kind of answer your original question, Teal, and that is, I do think that we have seen an impact, and I say that the impact has been to our folks that work for, CAL FIRE and the Forest Service and all of our other allied agencies. The demands and strains on our personnel in meeting the challenges and the mitigations of these large damaging fires over the past 10 years is significant, and frankly, it's outpacing what sometimes our agencies are built around traditionally, and we're working to evolve those so that we can take care of our people to the best of our ability, because the emergency never really stops. As Ellie said, there's, as the smoke clears, there are the care and the welfare of displaced persons and all the ancillary issues that come from these damaging events. But I think there's an equal impact to the people that live and work and thrive in our communities. And I want to recognize that too, because I live with that every day and every night, and understand that whether it's the smoke-filled summers or the evacuations or just that kind of nervousness that we feel in, sometimes 6 or 7 months of the year now, we recognize that, and we recognize the impacts that has on our community members. So as Ellie said, we welcome the rain. It doesn't necessarily put things to bed entirely, but we are shifting gears a little bit, always maintaining that emergency response, but shifting gears and being able to look at opportunities for aggressive fuel reduction and management as well. So thanks again, and I'm really, really happy to be here tonight, Teal.
Thank you both so much. Ellie, you ended your comments saying, before we look back. And then Brian, you also ended your comments with a little bit of a look forward. So I'm going to play on the heels of that and ask you, what are some of the ecological challenges, or perhaps I should say simply the challenges you are managing for at this moment looking forward? You mentioned the welfare, the healing. I am sure that is true of both landscapes and communities. What is it that you're managing for as you move through, this moment now when, as you said it, Brian, those 6 or 7 months that we're nervous about have, we knock on wood, ended and we shift gears? What are you managing for, and what are your priorities in this moment?
You want to start off, Ellie, or would you like me to, Teal?
Go for it, Brian.
Okay. Yeah, great question, Teal. And, I think one of the things that I think it's important to recognize, just so everyone has a clear understanding about the partnership and the way that the two agencies work together is, there is, I will say that California has a interagency working relationship between the federal and the state agencies, probably unlike anywhere in the United States. And more locally, I think that the relationship that we have worked hard to establish and enjoy here between the Tahoe National Forest and the Nevada Yuba Placer unit at CAL FIRE is something that I don't take lightly and take for granted. But we also have to recognize that the two agencies have individual missions, and the Forest Service, and I'll let Ellie expand on that, but that mission of the stewardship and the service of public lands is different than CAL FIRE's mission, which is the protection of private tax-paying lands. And 90% of the time they intermingle, and in the mitigation of emergencies and our service to the people, they are patchless, as we like to say. I think for CAL FIRE, one of the things that we are looking at, because we don't manage public lands, is we're looking at how can we better engage with the public and grassroots organizations, fire safe councils, community organization, HOAs, and then obviously our partners in the county. Supervisor Gustafson is on the call, I see, who is one of our strongest supporters in the county for fire protection and fire prevention efforts across the region. And so, one of my efforts as the rains fall and things shift gears a little bit is to take the lessons learned from 2021 and build into 2022. And one of those key objectives is to bolster that engagement with individual communities. Our department's mission of the home hardening, the defensible space, and the work we do with both education and inspections around private properties is very, very important to us. Last year, we did over 10,000 defensible space inspections on private properties across Placer and Nevada counties, and we'll continue to bolster those efforts as well. We take opportunities with the Forest Service and with state parks and other allied agencies to engage in fuel reduction efforts, but oftentimes we don't have the ability to do as large landscape level type prescribed fire operations or pre-fire operations as the Forest Service does. And so we have to center some of our objectives on more community-based, the protection of those communities, and recognizing the Forest Service objectives so that we're not working against each other's goals, but we're working in parallel with each other. So, and we also have to look at the impact of those communities from our large fires. In our state responsibility area last year in 2021, across the unit, we had about 361 fire starts, vegetation fire starts in 2021. In totality, we burned about 4,500, 4,400 and some change acres were burned, which I think if you relate the number of ignition starts to the number of acres burned, our success rate in initial attack firefighting and the protection of communities and life and property was very good. But some of those larger incidents left damage to the landscape, burn scars, erosion issues, etc., that we have to work directly with those communities and our allied partners, the water agencies, etc., to ensure that we don't have further damage, and especially if that's going to impact our allied partners like the federal government, Forest Service, BLM, or BOR. So those are some of our initial objectives looking into this off-season into the beginning of 2022.
Yeah, and I agree with everything Brian said. And so instead of reiterating everything he just said, I'll kind of take a different spin, and that's just to dive into some of the specifics of maybe some of you are wondering, like, once the fire is contained or controlled, what then specifically on the ground in that fire scar area? So the first thing that we typically do is try and do what's called suppression repair, which is trying to, while we are suppressing a fire, we may create bulldozer lines, we may create hand lines to try and, as part of our tactics, control that fire. We go back in and try and recontour the land very quickly while we still have equipment still on the scene to try and do as much of that, kind of repairing the actual firefighting work as we can. And so we call that suppression repair work. Then what we typically do in the Forest Service is we bring a team in just for like 1 week, and they're called the Burned Area Emergency Response Team, and they look at what the effects of that fire were on the landscape, and are there any immediate emergency needs for work to help prevent, massive landslides or washing outs of roads and things like that. And they'll usually put together a package of the top couple of things. It's not like an exhaustive list. It's what is emergency immediately needed to be done so that we don't have another disaster when the rains come, essentially. This year, we didn't have a lot of time to get that work done, right? Because right as we're finishing containment of a lot of these fires, we had an atmospheric river, and we had, some notice about that, but not a huge amount of notice. Thankfully, we were able to get a lot of the highest priority work on the large fires completed, so that we didn't see, massive new disasters as a result of the huge storm on top of fires. There were a couple places. Some of you might have seen the pictures from Highway 70 in the Dixie Fire area, where there was just a big landslide that covered the highway. There were a couple other things like that around the state, but for the most part, we were able to kind of control additional disasters related to that. And then the next piece of it is hazard mitigation. So there are a lot of what we call hazard trees out there, trees that are likely to fall at any moment and could potentially strike a roadway, a vehicle, or a person. And so we're in the middle of assessing where those greatest hazards are. And we've put together, teams of folks to go out and do that kind of assessment in those fire areas. And they're doing that work right now. If you live on the southern part of Lake Tahoe, or have gone through Highway 50 or the Mormon Immigrant Trail or some of these other places, you'll see that there are huge amounts of dead trees that have been taken down already that were posing an imminent threat to public safety from falling on those roadways. So we're in the middle of doing that. And then, of course, there's sort of what we call post-fire recovery in the forest. And I'm talking all about kind of forest type stuff. Brian kind of talked more about the community and private property piece. We are not going to replant 2.5 million acres by hand. That's just not in the cards. So part of the post-fire recovery planning is you look at that landscape. What areas burned at a super high intensity, and there's no seed source anywhere nearby that we actually may need to go and actively reforest. Other areas will determine, hey, there's a seed source nearby, we'll let it naturally revegetate. And then, there are areas where we may want to take out some of the burned trees, and that, I hate this term, but some people call it salvage logging. But really what it is there are some places where there are burned trees that have economic value that could contribute to the reestablishment of communities. They could contribute to the economy, and they're easily accessible. We don't want to build a whole bunch of new roads and all of that, but there may be some areas where we can easily access some of those burned trees and do a project to remove them and contribute them to the economy, as well as create space for revegetation. So that a lot of that work, that post-fire recovery work takes a long time. We also have campgrounds that have burned up and other facilities, administrative sites that have burned in this fire season. So we have to look at how we're going to recover those facilities. The last thing I wanted to say on this point is here locally on the Tahoe National Forest this past year, we had 60 fire starts. The largest fire that we had on the Tahoe National Forest was 3 acres. So we were able, with all of the emergency response entities, we were able to really catch and contain those fires and keep them at a very small and manageable state. And I just wanted to give out this stat as to give you some perspective. We on 33 of those 60 fires, we had the support of CAL FIRE and other local partners in helping us respond. And so I think that's just so you all know that we in this area are operating really well together. On the incidents that Brian referenced, Forest Service personnel helped respond to 83 of those incidents. So, it's definitely a partnership, and we're working together to keep the fires manageable in this area. And if you want to at some point talk about what sometimes people talk about, like, well, part of the problem is that we keep the fires really small and naturally they're supposed to burn. And we can talk about the science about of that if we want to, but the short answer is this summer was not the summer to do that. This summer, because of the conditions, was a summer where we wanted to keep things as small as possible. And not have, because the conditions were not right for just letting stuff go. And so that's what we did.
Thank you both so much. And let me just say, if at any point you want to jump in on each other's comments, please do. You don't need to wait for me to ask another question. So with that said, Brian, if you'd like to comment, please do. Otherwise, I do have another question for you.
No, good. I mean, I agree with everything Ellie said. I don't want to understate that, the relationship we have here between the Tahoe National Forest and Nevada Yuba Placer Unit is a bit unique, compared to generally all parts of the state. It's something we work really hard to maintain, and it's something that I think at the end of the day, it's one of the greatest benefits to the citizens and the communities on both the east and the west side of Placer and Nevada counties is that we look at things from a patchless standpoint in regards to that initial attack response to fires and the protection of life and property. So yeah, well said, Ellie.
And thank you both for the roadmap you just gave through both of your agencies and time. I think that was an extremely helpful perspective on what happens both through the fire season and moving out into the winter, and what happens next, but also how things move linearly across your agencies in terms of the moments in time and what it is that you're managing for. Brian, I really love the comment that in our service to the people, we view that as patchless. And it sounds like the way that you are collaborating with each other, while perhaps unique and particularly collaborative, also has that effect of being somewhat patchless. And I am sure I'm not alone in thinking that means we as a community benefit from that. And I want to ask a question on that very topic, because Brian, you mentioned, both that CAL FIRE is interested in working with community organizations more closely. And I think, Ellie, it was you who mentioned that there are many affected areas from this past summer that are still significantly impacted. So what I'm interested to ask is, if those fires had been here, can you give us a picture of what our community might be experiencing that would be quite different at this moment in time? Can you help us understand what it means for those communities that are closer to the areas that burned this last summer?
Well, Yeah, maybe the best way to kind of explain the relation to what some of our communities to the north and the south of us went through and are still going through is to give you an idea of the impact at a much smaller scale from a fire on the west slope in the area of Colfax, and that was the river fire that happened earlier this year. And while it was not of the magnitude or scale as the Dixie or the Caldor, it still had a lot of the same elements, and the effect to the people that lived in and around that community was the same. And so, we've been talking about that response and that collaboration when it comes to the mitigation of emergencies. I think what people also hopefully can understand is that our relationship with our local law enforcement partners is one of the most critical things, success factors that we have here in our area. And our work with both Nevada and Placer County Sheriff's offices, having that statutory authority for evacuations, making unified decisions with law enforcement and fire agencies is absolutely critical to minimize the impact to the communities and to the people who live in those communities, because there is an evacuation component, but then there's also a repopulation component. And part of that repopulation component that I think people across the state are dealing with right now is that, some people are repopulated back into their homes that have been saved, and that's done through a process. But sometimes people are reintroduced into an area where everything they have has been lost, and the community sometimes that they lived in and grew up in and thrived in has been destroyed. This is where I think also the counties and some of the grassroots community organization groups come into play. And, the counties have what are called local assistance centers through the Office of Emergency Services in each county. And those organizations are set up to bring all elements that could impact a person's life in the event of an emergency, to bring all those organizational structures into one place, so that as we try to rebuild the lives of our communities, they never have a question that falls on deaf ears. They have a person right there to talk to in real time that can help them with everything from the permitting process to the removal of hazard trees, to restoring power, to rebuilding their home, to homeowners insurance, to accessing water and power, et cetera, et cetera. And while at a smaller magnitude on the river fire, we were able to accomplish that in the span of a month or so, 2 months, on an incident like the Dixie Fire or the Caldor Fire, that process is going to be going on for months, if not years. And I reflect on the Camp Fire, which we just had the anniversary of on Monday. November 8th of 2019 was the 3-year anniversary of the Camp Fire, where almost 20,000 structures were destroyed. That community is still rebuilding to this day and working through that process with counties and local organizational structures. So I think to answer your question, when we have these really large magnitude incidents, the firefighting and suppression efforts and even some of the environmental restoration efforts are just a small piece of the pie. And that restoration of the community resilience and getting what I like to call that sense of normality brought back to a community is a daunting task. And it's something that we work really, really closely with all of our partners on. But that's where the county and the incorporated cities and towns and organizations like yours, Teal, come into play to basically reestablish that sense of normality back into that community.
Yeah, I think what Brian described is spot on, and so again, I'll take things maybe in a slightly different direction, which is I think we are doing a lot in this community to make sure that what we saw doesn't happen here, and that includes a number of things. One of the things that we're doing is is a number of entities, the Forest Service, CAL FIRE, the local Truckee Fire, and then a number of community organizations are working together to do treatments on Forest Service lands, on private lands, in and around the community, to treat the vegetation so that these types of things don't impact the residential and community places in the Truckee area. Some examples of that are, the Big Jack East project that we just finished a huge phase of, that's right in the Sierra Meadows, Ponderosa Palisades neighborhood of Truckee. We're working with Truckee Fire and others using CAL FIRE money to do a project in the Glenshire Brockway area, going on private lands as well as some of the Forest Service lands, to create a fire break over there. We're doing work in the Prosser area, and some of you that live in that area may have seen our equipment, and then we've done some prescribed fire around there as well, and also around Alder Creek. We're also doing work over there. Some of the other private folks are doing work as well. Folks like at North Star are doing work in and around that community. Folks at Martis Camp, folks all over the community are really active in trying to take collectively on this responsibility to get the forest and the lands in a place where we won't experience something like that. One of the things that we are seeing is that the work in and around people's homes is very important, and looking out further is also really important, because what we're seeing is these fires are moving very fast. And so we can actually run models to figure out where are the most important places in a many mile radius to protect a particular place. So as an example, we've done this for Downeyville, California, which is, in Sierra County. And it turns out sometimes the most important place to treat is not the quarter mile from your home, because maybe you've already done that. And maybe the community's already done that work. And now the most important place for us to focus is 12 miles away, so that if a fire starts, it's not going to race into town. And so that is, I think the Caldor fire is a great example of this, right? The Caldor fire started something like 35 or 40 miles away from South Lake Tahoe. 10 years ago, people weren't thinking, oh, in order to protect South Lake Tahoe, we need to treat 35 miles away. No, they were thinking, well, we need to treat right here. And they did. And it helped. Those treatments in South Lake Tahoe helped to save those communities, along with a number of other things, like the folks that were responding, like the time of day where the fire crossed into South Lake Tahoe. Like, a lot of things contributed to those areas in South Lake Tahoe not experiencing devastation. And we also need to learn lessons from this, right? Like, wow, we need to figure out how to treat other areas of the forest so that we don't even have to worry about that. And we can hopefully manage, control a fire well before it gets to these places. So that's kind of what I see as some of the future work.
Thank you so much. I had written down a question to ask you both at some point in this conversation, which was about moments of pride, frankly, in looking at what's been accomplished, and then just listening to you. 33 of the 60 fires, tackled, I'll say, probably not the right word from either of your perspectives, in collaboration. 361 ignitions, only 4,500 acres burned. The community protection, the looking out for their Big Jack East, Glenshire, Prosser. I'm not going to ask you that question because you have listed so many things in just the last few moments that I think are really remarkable insights into the experience of healing and protecting the forest and our communities that we maybe don't see or don't understand fully as community members. I'll speak for myself in that. So thank you for highlighting those facts. And I think it's really enlightening and powerful to hear. So thank you for that. And Ellie, you just took us in the direction that I was thinking of going, which is let's look forward. Let's look at what's on the horizon for both of you. Obviously, it's, natural to answer that from an agency perspective. I'm also interested in what that means from a forest perspective. What's on the horizon for the forest in which we live, and how is it that you now look forward toward the 2022 6 to 7 months of nervousness, as Brian phrased it, which is now what I'm going to call it from here on out, so I don't have to say fire season. So let's take a look forward and pull the lens back out a little bit, and love to hear your perspectives as you look into the next year and into the winter. And Brian, let's go ahead and start with you again as well, please.
Okay, great. Well, I think first and foremost, Teal, I always kind of reflect on the things that are in front of us that we can't necessarily change, and then basing our objectives off some of those things. So, what we do know about California is that it's a Mediterranean climate. It is designed to burn ecologically and historically. It has a probably series of wet and dry cycles that far exceeds our ability to record that, and so we sometimes base our decisions on this small moment in time. What I have seen through my 31 years is I've seen dramatic droughts across our region, and I've seen very, very wet cycles, and trying to figure out exactly where we're sitting right now is a little bit challenging, because we certainly experienced a historic drought back in the 2014, 15, 16, and then that was punctuated by this historic wet cycle, and then we kind of started to get back into another obviously drought cycle, and then now we're getting 11 inches of rain in 48 hours. So I think what we are trying to do is figure out exactly what kind of weather patterns we're going to be living in year to year. And I don't know if it's going to continue to be unstable, or how well we're ever going to be able to predict those. Now, some of the things that we have added into the equation, and really, I think the most punctuated thing that we've added into the equation is the population of the state of California. And that presents a lot of the challenges on both the National Forest System lands and on private lands across California that are in a Mediterranean climate that is designed to burn, that we have populated with infrastructure and people. So, as I look forward out of 21 into 2022, I have to ask myself, what are those measurable and attainable objectives that we can meet as we move forward? CAL FIRE has been very, very aggressive in the administration of our fire prevention grants. As Ellie mentioned a little bit, across Placer and Nevada counties on both the east and the west slopes, we have administered well in excess of $10 million in fire prevention grants to either direct funding to CAL FIRE, to our partners in the Forest Service, to some of our local RCDs and fire safe councils, to administer fuel reduction projects in the direct protection of communities. One of the things that we have taken advantage of on the state side in the Truckee and North Tahoe area is, as we've evolved out of kind of this fire season model and into a much more year-round threat matrix, we have dedicated year-round staffing of our engine at Truckee, and what that allows us to do. We have 2 engines normally stationed in partnership with the Truckee Fire Protection District at the airport. And we maintain that year-round staffing with Truckee Fire Protection District. What that enables us to do is take advantage of the isolated weather events in the Truckee Basin when we have snow on the ground, and get really aggressive on pile burning and taking advantage of weather patterns so we can try to reduce some of those fuels, get access and egress routes opened up. That ironically, on the west slope of the county, sometimes those windows get a little bit shorter. It's either too wet or it's too hot and dry for us to really engage in any kind of pre-fire or prescribed fire operations. So the east side specifically has been a really great area for us to commit and invest in our year-round staffing up there. And it also lends to the emergency service response and the mutual aid response for Truckee and North Tahoe. So we're going to continue with that. We're going to continue with the administration of those grants across the region. That's really, really important to us. Our agency also has evolved in a mindset where we are taking that word fire season that you used, Teal, kind of out of our vernacular, and we are maintaining at least a transitional staffing level with our fire stations 12 months a year, fully staffed. And that's been an evolution of our department over the past 75 or 80 years, but it's in a direct answer to the way that California is reacting now and the way that fires are burning and the service to the public across the region. And then thirdly, I always say that like the community engagement, there's that suppression we've talked about, there's the prevention efforts, and then there's that community engagement. And I believe that just continuing to engage with our community groups and the education components and just generally interacting with the public as much as possible. Because again, on those private lands, sometimes we don't have the same windows of opportunity as Ellie might on the National Forest System land. So, but together, combining our efforts, I think we can do great work together. So those are a couple of the things that we're looking forward into 2022.
Yeah, absolutely. And so I love talking about what's next. And so a couple of things that I wanted to kind of throw out to you all. I think we've mentioned prescribed fire a little bit tonight, and I think that is going to be really important for all of us to wrap our heads around. I know that after a fire season like this, the last thing people want to see is more smoke. However, prescribed fire is one of the most important tools we have to manage large landscapes into the future. And it's also a part of the natural processes. As Brian mentioned, that where we live in California, it naturally wants to burn. And so it's better for us to control and prescribe that burning as opposed to it being a wildland fire that we are then responding to. It is going to burn. The question is, in what manner is it going to burn? And so that is one of the reasons why we've really been trying to ramp up our education about prescribed fire, our preparation for prescribed fire, and our implementation of prescribed fire. And just to give you an idea, when I started on the Tahoe National Forest in 2010, in a good year, really good year, we would do 600 acres of prescribed fire. Just in the last month, we have done almost 1,000 acres of prescribed fire on the Tahoe National Forest, some of it in the Truckee area. And so when we do prescribed fire, we try and minimize the impact of the smoke onto communities. We run all these air models, that they're only as good. There's a saying that every model is wrong, but it provides you good information. So we run these models to try and make sure that we're impacting folks the least amount as possible. We try and do a lot of public education about when we're going to do prescribed fire, but we really have to at some point be okay with seeing more prescribed fire in the community. We can't do prescribed fire all the time in the condition that a lot of our forests are in right now. So we have to go in and do some treatment in order to get them into a situation where they can receive prescribed fire. And so that's a lot of what we've done in and around Sierra Meadows and Ponderosa Palisades, North Star, Mars Camp, in that area. That's what we're doing all over the place. Our next project that we're planning right now is along the 89 corridor. As you head south from Truckee towards Lake Tahoe, treating that west side of 89 in between Truckee and the ski resorts. That's gonna, and you may have seen, we did some public outreach on our proposed action for that area. We're really excited about getting to a decision on how to design the treatments for that area and jumping into implementation. And then, I think it would be really great to get together with the community and look at the areas around Truckee and Tahoe and look at, like, well, what are the values that we want to emphasize as we think about doing management of the national forests and the private lands. We've been talking a lot tonight about fire, which is the topic, but we all know that the forests and this community have a lot of other benefits, like recreation and like social interactions, etc. Economic sustainability, and then so wildlife habitat. We haven't talked at all about wildlife habitat, but I know that that's a strong value for a lot of people in this community. So it would be great to get together and look at, well, what does it look like if we want to emphasize this value versus that value? Because they can be different. And we want to get to a place where we're all on the same page about how we're managing the forest, where we're actively managing, where we're not actively managing, because we can't actively manage everything. So we need to make choices, and we'd like to make those choices with all of you. So I am going to leave it there because I think maybe there are some questions that we can go through.
Teal, just to tag on real quick to the discussion about fuel reduction efforts, and that I see on the chat there was a question from Theo, I believe is the first name there, and talking about in the context of looking forward and seeking impactful strategies to reduce home loss, and talking about the difference between large scale fuel reduction versus home hardening and the 0 to 5 foot zone. And I do think it's important, I think, just to be fair and transparent, the challenges that Ellie faces in the national forests are different than we face in CAL FIRE protecting state responsibility and private lands. So yes, we do oftentimes cross boundaries and work well together. What I will tell you is that our agency works under the Public Resources Code, and part of that is 4290 and Title 14, which has generated all of the defensible space guidelines in California and the home hardening guidelines and the new building construction guidelines in California. And I know that specifically in Truckee and North Tahoe, that's a challenge. And we work really, really hard with CAT and all the agencies around the lake and in the Tahoe Truckee area to try to mitigate those issues in areas where it can be challenging. But I would agree with that question that for me, while I think everything we've talked about tonight is important, the public still has a responsibility when you live in an environment that has a threat from wildland fires to do your very best to home harden, to have building construction materials that are going to withstand an impending fire, and to maintain not only that 0 to 5, that direct zone, but also that 100-foot defensible space. And depending on the area you live and the topography features, that may be more so. Now, the most common problem we run into that, especially with smaller lots and areas like that, is that 100 or 200 feet hits a property line before you maintain that defensible space. And maybe that property line is an unmaintained area or someone else's property. And so that's where local ordinances come into effect. And in Placer County, we have our local Placer County ordinance that takes the defensible space and applies it to land ownerships that do not have habitable structures on them. So, and so I think it's really important for me to make sure that from our agency standpoint, we rest our laurels on really that community protection and the engagement and buy-in from the public. I can tell you firsthand that the efforts from the communities around Placer and Nevada counties in home hardening defensible space absolutely saved homes in 2021. And I would suspect I would see the same thing as you reached out into areas in South Lake Tahoe and the Caldor and areas on the Dixie. It's not going to prevent damage 100% of the time, but it is a measurable and attainable objective that we have.
Thank you so much. We do have a number of questions, which is very exciting. And I'm going to ask you one that came from an attendee and then pitch over to Nicole, who will manage the rest of the question and answer. In the few moments we have left, we might just do a little lightning round so that we can get as many of them in as possible. The question that I received, which we'll ask you, and then we'll move to other questions, is about whether or not the strategies of both containing spread and mitigating wildfire through restoration of landscape has changed at all, given the extraordinary circumstances of the last couple years. And to put a finer point on it, the root of that question, and I'm reading this from it was shared with me, is there any hope of making a dent in the treatment needed across the large landscape areas that we're discussing? Ellie, you mentioned looking further and further out. Or is it more realistic to expect our approach to be more and more reactionary going forward? And it'd be interesting to hear both of your perspectives on that. And then Nicole, over to you. So Ellie, why don't you jump in first this time?
So thanks for the question. It's a good one. Part of it, I think I'll rephrase as, what are we learning? And I guess to be really frank, we are still learning about how to respond to this changing environment that we're facing. And, we are trying different things as part of suppression tactics. Some are working, some are not. And, I think right now, in between now and June is a really important time for us to take a breath, think about what we tried, think about what worked, think about what didn't work. And I was actually going to say this earlier, but, as we move out of a operation environment where we were a lot of times focused on COVID mitigation into a different operating environment in the off season, it gives us the opportunity to maybe go back to having what we called kind of preseason meetings with all of the response agencies, talk about, hey, what went well, what didn't, how are we going to approach things this coming year should something emerge. So I think we'll have more of an opportunity to do that this coming spring and winter than we did last year. So we'll have more of an opportunity to reflect and learn from those things. In terms of the hopefulness, I don't know. I'm kind of naturally a hopeful person. I wouldn't be like putting all the energy and effort into all of this if I didn't have a belief that we can make a difference. And I think we are. I think academia and researchers are showing us that yes, the treatments that we design and do can make a difference. Is anything 100%? No. No, but reducing the probability of a large scale catastrophic event absolutely is something that we've proven what we're doing is able to accomplish. And even in those situations where maybe it doesn't stop the fire, it creates time, it creates space, it reduces the intensity of that fire. It gives us time to do other things where, it gives us a spot where the fire's not moving 17 miles in a single day. It's hitting some of these areas, slowing down, cooling down, taking its time. It may not go out, but it will give us time to do other things. So I absolutely think that we can make a difference. I think we are making a difference, and I'm actually really excited about what we can do in the next couple of years.
Thanks so much, Ellie and Chief Estes. We're going to go to a couple other questions that have been submitted. One of them was submitted ahead of time by Jeff Dowling, and I think to try to be efficient here, we're going to have two questions posed to you guys and let you answer both of them. So first we'll have Jeff, if you want to unmute yourself and ask your question, and then Dana, if you want to follow Jeff and ask your question, and then we will have Brian and Ellie address both.
Hi, Ellie and Chief Estes. Chief, I haven't seen you in a while, but you've heard my name, I'm sure, from Steve. And
good to see you, Jeff. Good to see you.
Some of your staff. I'm a retired CAL FIRE forester, and I also work as a retired annuitant for Truckee Fire. And while I was in Siskiyou County, which was then CDF, CAL FIRE at that point in time, CDF, and the Forest Service cooperatively put prescribed fire on the ground. And I think those opportunities exist today, and it'd be great if we could do that again. And I'm just wondering if maybe here on the east side, like Chief Estes was saying, and I already have a ready-made spot to put the fire on the ground, it would be great to do that.
Well, Jeff, you've always taken advantage of opportunities, so I appreciate that, and could not agree with you more. The east side is actually a kind of a unique environment, and you know this better than most, Jeff, in that you have a lot of state responsibility area, a lot of national forest system lands, and then what a lot of people don't realize is that the incorporated town of Truckee local responsibility areas are expansive. And a lot of those areas are also open space and wildlands that are susceptible to wildland fires. And then you have adjacent agencies and large homeowners associations that lie in and around those communities. So I think the Truckee Basin is a place where we can and we do, and we will continue in the future to take advantage of interagency operations when it comes to prescribed fire. Obviously, each agency with that land ownership has to kind of be that lead agency for the planning and the environmental process and all that kind of stuff. But that's one of the things when I talked earlier about our year-round staffing in Truckee is to take advantage of working with state parks at Burton Creek and North Tahoe, to work with the Forest Service in Truckee and in the basin. In fact, I've signed an MOU with the Lake Tahoe Basin that allows us to operate with both local agencies and the Forest Service on their burn projects, and essentially just be able to lend a hand and be able to cut through some of the red tape to give resources needed to accomplish the goal. I think one of the things that we have to be honest with ourselves about is that prescribed fire is really a great benefit and a great tool, but it's certainly not the only tool. And one of the downsides or one of the challenges we have with any kind of prescribed fire, whether it's pile burning or landscape, is smoke management. And smoke management is very challenging in California. There are certain atmospheric stability issues that allow us to burn and not smoke out our communities and negatively impact tourism and the economy. And so that's a balance. So it's a combination, I think, of prescribed fire, mechanized thinning, probably some timber harvesting operations where applicable on either private or federal lands, and just using the kind of the right tool in the applicable situation. But yes, Jeff, the answer to your question is we're all in on that for sure.
Thank you.
Ellie, did you want to add anything, or?
No, I think we can go to the next question.
Okay. Dana, if you'd like to unmute yourself and turn on your video if possible, and go ahead with your question about second homeowners.
Yeah, I've got can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. My video's not working so good. So anyway, I'll just go ahead. I live in Agape, and I'm part of the Fireways community committee. There's about 10 of us, and with the last 2 summers, we've had extreme success at getting a good portion of our the homeowners to clean up their yards and create awareness. And we've gotten federal money for dumpsters and whatnot. But, the truth is you're only as Firewise and as good as your neighbor, your next door neighbor. And there's a lot of second homeowners here that don't clean up their yard and don't respond to our letters. So I was just wondering if the North Tahoe Fire Department or any agencies, there was a talk of doing drive-by inspections and sending warning letters to property tax addresses. And if they don't respond, the agency was going to come in and clean up their yard and then send them a bill. Is this still happening?
Yes, I think there's a number of things that can be addressed there. North Tahoe Fire Protection District does have defensible space inspectors, and they do have a local district level ordinance that they can apply to absentee lots or homeowners. We have defensible space inspectors as well that work in the Lake Tahoe Basin, and in the role that we serve as the Placer County Fire Department, we can utilize the Placer County ordinance in order to kind of span that gap between absentee homeowners versus permanent homeowners. And so the answer is yes. And at the end of the day, the best thing that we can do is get someone out to your Firewise community, either from Cal Fire, County Fire, or from North Tahoe Fire Protection District, or both. Get us out to your Firewise community meeting, hear exactly what the issue is, and we'd be more than happy to address that issue for you.
And who exactly should we call on that one if we narrow down on the specific person?
Dana, in the chat, North Tahoe Fire, Eric put his email there. If you're not if you're not able to see the chat, I can send you this chat directly via email after this, so you have his contact information.
I have that. Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Thank you. All right, we're going to go to our final kind of lightning round question because we're running out of time here for Brian and Ellie. And this question came to us ahead of time from Matt Taylor, and it's reflective of a question that he asked. And we share interest with this question and would like to ask you guys each, if there's one thing you'd like to be sure our community understands, one message you'd spread as widely as possible about your work and about fire and forest, what would that be? And we'll give you each about a minute to answer.
I'll just kick things off. I think you all are already doing the right thing. The Tahoe Trekkie Community Foundation is helping bring you all together to maintain the interest and support for this type of work. You're trying to take responsibility for your own personal private property. That's the key. And you're being supportive of our efforts. Those things are, in my view, the keys to a successful future. And I really am. I mean, I will tell you, not every community I work in or have worked in has as much interest and energy around this topic as you all do. So kudos to you. I think if we keep working together like this, we'll be able to make a difference in the future. So I guess do more of the same of what you're already doing, and stay engaged, and don't go down the spiral of we can't do anything. Don't go down the spiral of we're not making a difference, because we are. I'm very confident of that, and we have to keep the energy and momentum going.
So I'll kind of, as Ellie was doing before, I'll kind of take it a little bit different direction, and I'll say that to continue and maybe enhance the ability to form Firewise communities in all areas of the lake and the Truckee Basin is one of the best avenues we have to connection with your local emergency responders and to grant funding. And also obviously the Fire Safe Council as a governing body, utilizing the Fire Safe Council Firewise community network and accessing grant funding for fuel reduction on private lands has been one of the best efforts that we've seen in Placer and Nevada counties. What I will tell everyone, and I want to assure everyone out there, is that the emergency response, the commitment to emergency response, the commitment to the protection of the communities in Truckee and Lake Tahoe by CAL FIRE and all our allied agencies and all our law enforcement agencies, it is truly unique, and it's very, very robust. And we have taken the time to build the relationships ahead of time so that we operate, I believe, very efficiently when the emergencies occur. And an example of that is that, all of the agencies in the Lake Tahoe Basin, including North Lake Tahoe Fire Protection District and Incline and Truckee, are all dispatched by the Grass Valley Emergency Command Center, which we are interagency and co-located with the U.S. Forest Service. And so just that ability to send the appropriate resource, regardless of the patch on the door, to service the communities in Truckee and North Tahoe in the most aligned manner, I think is a good example of our commitment into the future to the communities there.
Thank you guys so much for that. We only have 2 minutes left, so I'm going to hand it over to Kate to wrap things up. If any of you have remaining questions that you didn't get a chance to ask, feel free to email them to us at the Community Foundation, and we can field them to Ellie and Brian as well. We just want to respect everyone's time and end on time. So Kate, if you would like to wrap it up, and thank you again, Brian and Ellie.
Sure. Thank you so much, Nicole. And thank you so much, Chief Estes and Ellie, for being with us tonight. Just the breadth of the work that you both are doing with your teams is extraordinary, and we are very grateful for it. And I think there was also very clearly heard from you both a call to action for us as a community to really step fully into our responsibility as community members to support the work that you are doing, not to challenge it, not to think that maybe we know better, and that this is really going to take some sacrifice on everybody's part. Maybe your favorite tree or maybe your favorite mountain biking trail is closed for a while. There are things that we need to do that we don't want to do or don't understand why we need to do them. But I think that you're making a really clear case for us all partnering together. So thank you, everybody, for partnering with us tonight and joining us. I hope you will join us again on December 1st when we will have our next Salon. And the topic will be decreasing the threat of the 2022 fire season. And we're going to highlight during that Salon and explore some of the most promising restoration and innovative technology projects going on in our region. So if you really want to know sort of what are people doing on the ground that is not necessarily coming from the perspective that Ellie and Chief Estes brought tonight, here's another perspective, another group of people that are doing equally extraordinary work in a very different way. There's a survey link in the chat. We hope you'll send your thoughts so that we can hear what's important to you and craft our next upcoming salons to meet your needs and your interests. So we hope to see you on December 1st. Thank you again for joining us, and have a good night. Thanks so much.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Recording stopped.